Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome to our latest Cygilant webinar. Today, I'm joined by the one and only Dr. Jonny Milliken. As always, welcome everybody to our webinar.
Hi, everybody. So as the introduction states, I'm Jonny Milliken. I'm going to be walking through some of the questions and some of the topics that Joe has kindly prepared for us. I only know some of them I don't know. So we will be able to see how quickly and how effectively I can answer some of the curveballs he throws.
We have faith in you, Jonny. All right. So everyone, today's webinar is titled, What Vendors Won't Tell You About Selecting Your SOC. And Jonny, let's dive right into this. So just to give everyone just an overarching theme of the webinar today, a security operations center, it means a lot of things to a lot of different, or it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So we're going to dive in, help you guys arm yourselves with the knowledge that you need to better prepare yourself to making a decision on selecting your SOC. So Jonny, without further ado, so we're gonna pick Jonny's brain here. Jonny has been in the industry for a very long time. Has very, very vast knowledge of the cybersecurity space, practicing and preaching. So Jonny, if you were in one of our attendees' shoes right now, they're evaluating SOC-as-a-Service, or maybe they're even thinking about building it themselves, what have you. What is the first thing that you ask the vendor?
Honestly, the first thing that I always encourage people to go and do is to try to actually run a POC or try to understand how it actually performs under the hood, and see if that is a thing that they can facilitate. I would put it as equivalent to the likes of buying a car. You would turn up and you would look at the car, you read the brochure about the car, you would say, okay, well, yeah, this looks like indeed like a pretty good car. I would presume it turns on. I would presume that those things work the way that I expect. But you would go and validate that if you're making such a purchase, or ending up into a sort of long-term lease, right? If you're going to select a vendor for a number of years. Then you definitely want to go and take it a test drive. You want to make sure that it fits with your needs. You want to make sure that just because it looks like it does the things that you need, does it actually do the things that you need? Whenever you sit in the actual seat and start to drive, is it actually fulfilling the things that you need, or did it just kind of sound good? And actually the problem you're trying to solve with your acquisition of the car isn't the same, right? If you've got this really great sort of supercar in front of you and you're like, oh, that's a really attractive supercar, I kind of want that, but you have 9 kids. So in the end, whenever you actually drive it around, you go, whilst this is indeed a very attractive proposition, this isn't actually what I need right now. The thing I need right now is something that can actually do an awful lot more lifting and something that can actually help me in some of my more practical day-to-day things. But of course, it's different for everybody, which is why the test drive is so important. For some people, the supercar is what they want, right? For some people, it's a saloon. For some people, it's an entire people carrier. For some people, it's different things. And sometimes it takes that sort of experience in order to really understand what it is that you need, because it isn't just about what that service can do, what that service is capable of giving you, as a vendor. It's about how well does that fit with your needs, and how much of it is ultimately how much of it ends up being a partnership rather than a sort of customer-vendor relationship. I'm always a proponent of believing that whenever people are seeking out security as a service, they're actually seeking out security as a service in terms of what all those terms mean. They're not just looking for SIEM alerts to be fired at them. They're not looking for to get some vulnerability scanning once every period. They're looking for the entire package. What they're looking for is there to be somebody there that they can go to with a series of security questions, or can start to solve the core security problems that they have in their business, and to work proactively with them in order to improve their own security posture. So those would be the things I would suggest. Can I go and test drive it and really try to identify whether or not the things that they provide or the things they specialize in, if they directly meet with the things that you as your business needs?
Jonny, I love how you always bring it back to real life scenarios. So you relate shopping for a security operations center provider as shopping for a car. So I step onto a car dealership lot, I've done my research. I know that this car may or may not be right for me, but I'm not pulling the trigger until I get in and drive that thing. Right? So awesome. All right. So moving on to SOC staffing. So SOC staffing is a very important thing. So we take great pride in our robust SOC across the globe. Jonny, let's talk a little bit about staffing of a SOC, right? You know, you could have one person with automation. You could have 35 people, red and blue team. I mean, let's paint a little picture for the audience of what it could look like on both sides of the spectrum.
Sure. So staffing a SOC is a challenge. It's one of the reasons why people outsource it, and then partnerships with security as a service providers is because if you want to effectively staff it with people who know the processes, who know the systems, who have the expertise, that is a challenge. There's a global shortage of people with the expertise in order to do these types of roles. Right? There are more jobs being created in these fields than there are graduates who can come out and do the job effectively. So any SOC staffing has to acknowledge the fact that there's going to be a significant amount of training that has to occur, and a significant amount of development and investment has to occur in these people in order to make them effective. And as well as that, it's not just taking the people that you have and then making sure that they are capable, of making sure that there's also the processes so that the next people that come on through and the next people that come on through, because in terms of SOC work, eventually somebody will become, very senior, and then they'll be offered a great job somewhere else, and that's the natural behavior of things, right? With people here in high demand, so you have to be able to make sure that the next people that come through, can be developed and can be as good as, if not better than, the people that came before them, and you're consistently refreshing the people that are inside your SOC with more and more capable, more and more trained, and much more expertise as time goes on. And part of that is to do with the people that you're coming in with, and it's also to do with the type of people that you're coming in with, and it's also about building the correct framework for those people to come into. So if I was building a SOC completely from scratch, and then I was to say to somebody, okay, well, come on in and then just sort of do some security, please. Right, well, it's unlikely that those people are going to succeed. They might very well, by chance, by the flip of a coin, they might come in and they might do a pretty good job. But I mean, the chances are that they're not really going to meet the needs of those businesses, or they're not necessarily going to be able to meet the actual security outcomes that a business would be needing. So it's about bringing those people in and making it clear to them what success looks like, and making sure that they have a clear path to make sure that they can develop, move closer towards their ultimate career goals, whilst also, providing something back into the business and into ultimately the customers that business has. But by the same token, as you talk about red team and blue team, it is true, and it always has been true, that the most effective people who are red teamers are people who understand the blue team, and the most effective blue teamers are people who understand red team. So you can never really effectively say, well, I'm only ever really on one side. You have to have a true appreciation of the other side in order to be effective at that particular role. If I was a defender, but I didn't know what it was that generally attackers kind of wanted to do, or why they did it, or what kind of methods they would use, well, then it would be very difficult then for me to propose, well, this is the kind of thing an attacker might do, therefore my defense would need to look like the following. And equally, if you were a pen tester or something like that on the red side, well, if you didn't understand what defenses existed, then you would try an entire spectrum of things that had no chance of success, and yet you would spend all this time, on things that would ultimately be worthless, because, well, defenders these days are generally pretty good at defending against certain types of things. So you're constantly looking for those new innovations, right? And it is true to state that in the real world, whenever you're talking about ultimately our only real competitor in the end as a security vendor, our competitor is the attacker that's out there. The malicious actors sitting all around the world trying to find their way inside your network. Like, those are the true competitors that we're competing against. And as they are continually innovating, like the other side has to continue to innovate as well. So to bring that back in as well, you have to build a SOC that is not just people who follow processes, right? Because that might scale and that might work for a little while, but you also have to build in the innate possibility of people who challenge the existing processes and challenge the current way of doing things, and challenge those things in order to state, well, is that effective? Does it need to be better? How is it that we are keeping up with the new innovations that the attackers out there, that the red team for this perspective are doing? What are we doing as defenders in order to innovate to make sure that we are keeping up? What new detections are we doing? What new processes even are we doing in order to to improve those kinds of detections. And it's not even necessarily just from a product standpoint, right? So one of the big things in security as a service at the minute is endpoint, right? Which certainly is a product that can help provide insight into detections on each individual host and solves a whole plethora of problems, mostly from a data visibility and an acquisition of detection information perspective. But if you don't know how to integrate that into your SOC, if you don't know how to integrate those actual workflows into things that people will practically do, then all that data ends up just getting lost. I mean, you can have an entire data lake versus of huge volumes of data, but if the SOC doesn't understand how to query it and understand it and derive value out of those and actionable information out of that in the end as well, then it's not really all that useful. So a SOC analyst is built out of lots of different components, right? So there is that sort of defensive aspect, there is that offensive aspect. A greater component because of that larger volumes of data that are being constructed is to do with data analysis. It's the ability to look at large volumes of data within the context of a given customer or a given attack or things like that, and then to craft a narrative and to build a story. Humans, generally speaking, are built on top of stories, right? We tell each other stories all day, every day, right? And it's trying to convey the information that is sitting there in a story that is intelligible to the other side, so that you can convey your information. That is an increasing component of SOC workloads. Like we're really very much moving away from the idea of like, oh, we're just going to send you an alert and then we'll be done with it. It's very much more about putting that alert within the context and a narrative of what's going on inside your environment and what are the important things to your business. And that's really the thing the SOC, any SOC should be searching for.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, the last thing anyone needs is an alert pusher or just an alert forwarder. I love how you guys provide the context and the intelligence to the customer, and that gives them the ability to act fast, right? And that's what it's all about. So Jonny, I was just taking some notes. So I once again, so what popped into my head, which was pretty funny. So it's like you're talking about defense versus offense, red team versus blue team. You know what's funny in like the grand scheme of things, you can kind of relate it back to how they say that offense sells tickets, which are the hackers. Everyone loves that. It's always in the news. It's like the hot thing to talk about. But defense wins championships, right? So the defense is
definitely. Yeah, I mean to be offensively, and again to throw out sort of more idioms, the attackers only really have to be successful once, whereas the defenders have to be successful every single time, right? So one might understand then that the actual activity and the job of the defender is much harder, and for men, like in many ways it is. But as well as that, I think that what people don't really, well, we might get to this. I don't know about your future questions, but one of the things that also comes across from a defensive and from a SOC perspective is that there's an awful lot, like it's not as sexy as attackers, right? Like this idea, like, oh, I've built an exploit and I find my way into a system, or I'm a pen tester. You go, oh, this is great. I've managed to find a way through a chink in the armor, or whatever else, right? It's not as sexy to be on the defensive side, but it's much more challenging, and there's a lot much more. I would suggest that there's a lot more worthwhile sort of like feelings that come out of like being able to provide that defense, particularly from a security as a service perspective. Whenever you know that a large number of the customers you're protecting don't, practically speaking, have the resources in order to build their own SOC. That's just the reality of it. Like it's exceptionally expensive to build your own individual SOC for each individual customer. So like accessing some sort of security as a service is probably their only way of gaining that level of insight and that level of expertise. And in that perspective, like to be able to provide them that service and to know that you were there at their time of need in order to really provide them with that service and that value, right? It's the similarities in terms of cybersecurity and red team, blue team are all across the spectrum. Like the idea of like police versus criminals, right? I mean, to be that policeman and to be that person that's protecting people who need that protection and who really value that protection, and whenever you can actually turn around and then say, no, well, we have really saved your bacon on that given day, right? There's a great reward that comes out of that.
It feels incredible. What I always say is that it's always more fun to be a pirate than to be a sailor, but someone has to do it. So let's move on to the next topic here. So 24 by 7 by 365. What does that really mean? So, Jonny, I'll open this up to you. Cygilant, we are a true 24 by 7 by 365 SOC as a service provider. Jonny, what does that really mean?
Yeah, so I mean, there's various different meanings you can drive out of it, right? Certainly the first one is that there's always somebody there 100% of the time, all day, every day. The reality is there are multiple people there, all the time. But there's always somebody available, always watching for things that go on. And that is not just from an incident handling perspective, right? So you have security operations center, and most people, whenever they're thinking about security operations center, the idea that they have inside their head is that, okay, well, you have this, you have an incident, right? An incident will occur, and that can happen at 4 a.m. on a Saturday, right? And then there'll be somebody there to go and look at that and triage it and be like, that's a real problem. I'm going to pick up the phone and I'm going to ring that customer and say, I think this is a real genuine problem. You might need to get into the office, right? And then that's one of the bigger values that come out of it. And that is one of the bigger, is probably the biggest demonstration of value that can have. But certainly the expectation or the hope, right, is that, you don't have customers aren't experiencing breaches on a very regular basis, right? They're actually experiencing them hopefully very, very infrequently. So then, well, what else are you getting all the other time, right? 24/7, 365, what is actually happening, right? So the analysis of incidents is one of them, but then by the same token, it's trying to identify, okay, well, how can we reduce noise in your environment? Well, that is also happening 24/7, right? Well, who is analyzing my data to identify whether or not there are new attacks or new things inside that data? Well, that also happens 24/7. What about, when attackers have built a new attack that they want to go and develop, or there's a new tool that attackers have built that is undetectable in terms of current standard detection mechanisms that you're utilizing, right? Okay, well, how do you build new alerts and how do you build new detections in order to keep up with those types of things? Well, that all has to happen 24/7, 365 as well, right? There are any number of instances. For example, you could pick any of them out of the recent past, but the one that usually sticks in people's minds is the Equifax breach, which was an Apache Struts vulnerability. It's a relatively old one now, but people tend to be quite familiar with it, mostly because the people who were breached ended up getting hauled in front of Congress. So from their perspective, there was a completely new vulnerability that appeared one day. Sitting there, normal operations, all of a sudden, attacker goes, I've got a new key that I can use to unlock their systems. And then the attacker started trying the key and all it unlocks, and it happened to work on theirs, and like, sweet, and then they got in, right? Super, right? So if you didn't have sort of 24/7, 365 constant investment in all aspects of security, not just analysis of incidents, but keeping an idea as to what are the new attacks, have we got detection for those new attacks, why haven't we got detection in terms of those new attacks, do we need new services, do we need new automation, do we need new systems, do we need new engines in order to be able to detect those? Okay, well, how can we go and develop those? All those types of activities are going on sort of 24/7, 365, and they work in tandem in order to provide that overall service. So yeah, to come back to as a summary in terms of 24/7, 365, it's not just incident handling, it's all of the work that has to go into supporting effective incident handling over the course of an entire year, and making sure that's staffed with, to go back to some of our previous questions, with people who are capable, with people who are given the capacity to innovate, for people who are well trained and demonstrate expertise and try to understand and convey narratives to people so that they can understand the story of what's going on, rather than just, as you say, just throwing alerts over a fence.
Yeah, excellent. I mean, if you think about it, if you were on the other side of the fence, I mean, when would you operate? Would you operate when you know that the IT team is working their 9 to 5? Or are you gonna operate when you know that no one's home? I mean, it comes back to the whole cops and robbers thing, and it's so true.
Yeah, and we definitely see it. Absolutely see it. See, anytime there, like Memorial Day is a recent one in the US, there was a spike in activity and attacks over that period. Well, why is that? Well, because attackers, same as everybody else, know that everybody's not at home. Again, to go back to your sort of cops and robbers, right? Well, when are the burglars going to attempt to get into the house? Well, whenever they know that people go on holiday, well, that would be the obvious time in order to attempt that. So if you do want to have that level of security, it's even more important that you're doing it at the quiet hours and at the holidays and at those other times, because those are the times whenever you're most vulnerable.
It'd be funny if, I mean, I could see, and this is just my opinion, see us as the Kevin from Home Alone. The hackers try to come when the rest of us are on vacation, or the staff is on vacation. Little do they know, Cygilant's there waiting. So don't come and knock.
It would be apt if only I wasn't so afraid of spiders. Then it would be fine.
I am too, so that's okay. Don't tell anyone. All right. So I feel like setting expectations in the beginning is key. So, this can be from the vendor side, this could be from the client side. Everyone needs to set expectations early and often. So I feel like, if expectations aren't set, someone partners with a cybersecurity as a service provider and, they get 6 months to a year into the relationship and they're just scratching their head. They're like, what is this organization doing for me? I mean, all we get is just alerts all of the time. It doesn't help us. Why is setting expectations so important in the beginning?
Yeah, setting expectations is important actually on both sides of the partnership going forwards. So if you're the customer in terms of setting sort of the customer expectations, for it to be an effective relationship, there has to be a give and take, and there has to be a back and forth. So you have to operate in partnership. So in terms of having proactive conversations about, okay, well, let's discuss this particular alert, or let's discuss this particular item, or let's identify if there are any problems, or let's let them know if we've changed something in our environment, or let's talk to them about the things that we're concerned about, right? And let's proactively reach out and then say, hey guys, we need some assistance, right? From a vendor standpoint, there should be a reasonable sort of proactive cadence in order to reach out and be like, is everything okay? Is everything okay? We've done some additional work for you, and we're going to go and implement this. Is that okay, right? And to start active conversations, right? But a conversation, as I say, has to be two ways, right? It can as much be the vendor throwing alerts over the fence as it can be the customer who just throws things back again as well. But you have to make sure that you're building a relationship and you're building that conversation.
Yeah.
And that's not even necessarily just with the SOC, right? So because of the way a SOC is staffed, so you have 24/7, 365, that means that you can't always access the same person 100% of the time, right? Because the nature of things, people have to sleep. So then, well, who else in the business can you talk to? Who are the other people that are sort of the people that work on 9 to 5? I mean, we don't expect necessarily the customers are going to wake up at 4 a.m. and then say, hey, I've got a question, right? They might, and they're welcome to, but most of the time they're going to be going throughout their 9 to 5s. And then there are, individual contacts that they can have within the security as a service provider that can help, more directly at those times. But it's about building that relationship and building that partnership and making sure that both sides understand each other. One thing as well is that from a security provider perspective is the visibility is probably the number one thing that causes problems. So what we would have is, for example, a customer comes to us and then says, oh, well, we're not really seeing, maybe a great deal value out of the service. And then we say, well, we understand that, but we have talked to you previously about the fact that you're not sending us A or B or C or D. If you were to send us those things, we really think that would be much more valuable. And they say, oh yes, well, we have had that on the list of things to go and do. We just haven't got to it. We'll get to it, in a couple of months. And of course, the customers are running their business. They're not running the business for the benefit of making the security provider's life easy. That's not the way this works. But there is a certain level of give and take in terms of saying, well, you can get more of the service if you do these things, or we really would recommend that it is more secure for you to do things in a certain way, right? And if customers are at least understanding from the outset, from an expectation setting standpoint, that there can be recommendations as to how it is that business should change its operations in order to be more secure. And that is ultimately in your interest, but it does require you to understand that there could be changes to your network, there could be changes to your infrastructure, there could be changes to the way that the policies that you have, or the way you treat users and whatever else. It can also ultimately flow out of the things that come out of the security service vendor. And it's about, I think, having an understanding of that from the outset and making sure that you have an understanding that it will take time on your side to implement those things, right? We can tell you the things that need to be fixed, but we cannot go and fix it for you. The most successful relationships are the ones where we can have that conversation and say, it would be good if we could fix these things that will make you go secure, and then for that time to be scheduled at some point. So that's one of the bigger components.
Awesome. So it has to be a two-way street, because the slightest change in a customer environment is going to alter the visibility that we have as a cybersecurity as a service provider. And of course, like you said, I mean, the client they care about business operations and keeping things running, keeping the lights on, keeping the business flowing. I mean, if they like I said, it has to be a two-way street. So Let's.
And there's a concept as well of front loading your costs, right? Like this exists in many different fields, but this idea that, well, the more work you do up front, the less ultimate work you're going to have to go and do later on, right? And that certainly works from this perspective as well. Like on onboarding, whenever you're starting a relationship with a security as a service vendor, that's the time in order to start getting sort of the list of the big hitters out and go, okay, right, so let's, now that we're fresh in our mind and, you know, we've started the relationship and now we maybe have the time and perhaps even the internal sort of capital or the internal sort of relationship capital in order to start making some of these things get changed, you know, that's maybe the time to go and do that. We try to provide as much value and as much insight and as much expertise to customers at the start of the relationship as possible, because it sets everything up for success later. Like the thing that we really hate to see is a scenario where a customer says, oh, look, I'm really concerned about this thing. Can you help us with that? Or, well, why didn't you detect this particular thing? And we go, because we don't have that data, or because we don't have those, we don't have that information, right? So if we can set ourselves up well and actually get all that data, you know, at the start and then maintain it going forwards, then we'll be in a healthier state. So that in a you know, we don't like to see it, but it does happen, right? A scenario where somebody says, oh, either I am breached or I think I am, or I think I'm breached. Then we do have all that data at hand. It's not a matter of saying, there's only so much data that we have. You have the rest of that data on this other system. I'm afraid you're going to have to go and do some digging for us in order to get us answers out of those logs or out of that system in order for us to be able to correlate what's going on, and it slows everything down. So front loading those costs and front loading those efforts to the start of the relationship can be very helpful in making sure that the relationship is healthy going forward.
Yep. And, you know, to help avoid those situations, I think that we do a good job of scoping the customer environment and, you know, identifying sources that we do need to collect from. But like you said, environments change all the time. So if, you know, you're partnered with someone in May and, you know, you have a complete overhaul of your infrastructure in June and you don't tell your service provider, you know, that, I mean, that just doesn't set yourself up for success. So
yeah, I mean, an example of that would be if you were changing, do you start using Office 365, right?
Yeah.
So if you were previously sending us the logs from something else, all of a sudden that starts to tail off, but doesn't go away because you're mid-transition, probably you're mid-transition for a significant period. There's always legacy systems somewhere. They just have to be left alone just because. And then, well, if you're now all of your data is going into Office 365, I mean, there are logs or integrations of that so that we can take in that data, we can analyze it. But if we're not told and if that data isn't sent to us, then we can never really know. And then all of a sudden, well, maybe that information is going to be useful later, right?
Yeah. You know what, Johnny? I feel like in terms of setting expectations, I feel like from the client side, it's more so like we could say it's setting expectations, but it's almost like setting a proper mindset. And you put me onto this, and I'm never going to forget it, but it's the cybersecurity journey, right? So I feel like that is really what we're offering. Forget about, you know, the service side. It's that cybersecurity journey, taking you from baseline to innovative, you know, doing like walking along that journey with you. And you're so passionate about that cybersecurity journey. I feel like if the client has that mindset, like I'm going to partner with this vendor to take me along that journey, like that's the mindset that you will ultimately get the most success from. I feel like. I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah, very much so. I'm always of the opinion that it should be a partnership rather than a customer sort of vendor relationship. That both sides have to contribute something into the engagement in order for both sides to succeed out of it. And it is about walking people through that journey, right? And it's about being there with them as they take those steps. And expectation setting is important in that. But then, you know, I've talked perhaps maybe too much about expectation setting on the customer side, right? I also talk about expectation setting, you know, on the provider's side as well, right? So on our side, we have to also understand, well, what is it that customer really truly values? Like, why have you bought the service? I mean, people buy it for lots of different reasons. Is it primarily compliance? Like, is it primarily security? Is it a mix of both? Like, are you really concerned about the sort of your key assets, but not really concerned about all the others? Or are you like, look, if anything at all has even the slightest hint of a problem, like I want to go and know about that. You know, are you really concerned about your users, or have you actually got rid of most user activity in a large scale? It's sort of service accounts and things like that, right? So like, what is it that a customer ultimately wants to get out of it, so we can more tailor that. And it's also as well understanding in terms of the security activity. if it's not possible because of various different reasons, right, in order to get rid of some security practices or to get rid of some practices that we would suggest would be insecure, but it's just the way the business is run. There's no real way in order to make that go away. But you know, then there will be incidents that continually are generated. We will continue to analyze them and be vigilant to make sure that, you know, there's nothing untoward going on there. But if you then do walk through that security journey, right, and you go from sort of baseline to innovative, and you slowly get rid of those things, and you actually should be experiencing less incidents over time. You should be experiencing less alerts and less alarms, and we should be contacting you less from that perspective. And then from that, and then what we have to do is then fill in the value they're experiencing, not from incidents anymore, but from all the other things that we're doing. Like, okay, well, let's have a conversation about your policies. Let's have a conversation about, you know, how you onboard users. Let's have a conversation about all those other bits and pieces, right? Because otherwise it becomes a scenario where as you walk people towards that sort of innovative security perspective, that there actually is very little insecure that goes on in their environment. There's very little threats that go on. They end up blocking most of them or have eradicated a lot of them because of some sort of technical control or because of some sort of policy control they've got in place. Well, then how can we continue to make sure that you are on, you know, the cusp of innovation? How can we make sure that you are continuing to follow the best practices, right? And how do we have less of an incident analysis relationship and more lean more on the consulting side of it, more on the expertise, where we are just a trusted partner, where you're saying, look, we need somebody to come in and give an opinion on a security topic. Well, they are our guys to go to for that, right? And that's ultimately where we want everybody to end up in the end.
Yep. I mean, a huge value prop that we're able to offer is the cybersecurity advisor, right? One-to-one with the clients. You know, they're the go-to for any unrelated questions, you know, anything outside of our core service offerings. I mean, you know, that's something that isn't really in the service descriptions or, you know, just painted all over the website, but like it's that type of value, right? That a cybersecurity as a service provider is able to bring to the client, but might necessarily not be so visible from the outside. I love this conversation here. Let's move along to the next topic here, Jonny. So gaining trust. So trust is by far the most important thing. So, you know, you have your client working in a various industry, XYZ, you know, that's their lifeblood, their company, you know, they very passionate about their organization. And then they have to go look to the outside to partner with someone who is going to be very intimate in their relationship or in their environment, right? So I can imagine that, you know, there would be a lot of hesitation, a lot of worry, a lot of concern around, you know, where's my information stored? Like, who's accessing my information? How do I know that you guys are properly taking care of my information? You know, there's a lot of things to consider here. And, you know, gaining trust is the most important thing, because once that trust has been established, the relationship can go to the moon. I mean, it's all about trust. And I mean, that's at our core is one of the most important things. So I guess let's talk about it from a high level, Jonny. I mean, the client to provider relationship, I mean, trust can be broken in an instant. You know, it's not gained instantly right when you sign on the dotted line. I mean, a vendor should prove to you, right, that you can trust them. So how does one go about gaining that trust?
Yeah, I mean, the important thing about gaining trust is to demonstrate that you are trustworthy, right, and that you can be relied upon, and that if somebody puts their faith in you and puts reliance upon you, that you can actually feed that back, and you can show that faith the respect that it deserves. So it is true to state that whenever you're taking sort of all of your logs about all the activity of all the users that's going on in your environment, and you are going to be sending that out to another vendor in order for them to analyze it and sort of feedback in terms of their expertise, that yeah, they've got quite a lot of insight into the environment. They can see lots of different things that are going on, and you want to make sure that you do have that trust, and that trust can be built out of lots of small interactions, right, or large interactions. So if you have the likes of like a breach would be a great example, right? So if somebody was there, so if we were a vendor, and then we had a customer and we said, okay, well, we think you've been breached, right? And then at that point, that they said, look, wow, this is really big, this is really hard. I'm not entirely sure that we were set up for this. Like this is quite serious. I really need some help, right? And that you know that there's not only just one person on the other side of it. You might have only dealt with one person up to that point. Maybe you've been with the vendor for a long time. But at that hour of need, did a flood of people appear in order to start doing large volumes of work for you that really got you out of that hole, right? Like at your time of need, did they arrive and did they turn up in numbers? And again, that's one of the things you can get out of security as a service that is really quite difficult to get if you do it yourself, right? Is that, you know, if you were in your hour of need and you had one guy, well, that one guy isn't going to multiply himself times 4, you know, at the hour of need. That's not the way that that works. Whereas in a scenario where you have that vendor, right? Well, then there are people over there that can be flooded towards this in order to help. Because there's always other work that's being done inside a SOC or inside those businesses that can be paused for the moment because there's something really very important that goes on in here. And really, whenever you see that expertise, whenever it really helps you, and then even in the end, if it does end up being a false positive, just the knowledge that there was somebody there that whenever you ring, you pick up the bat phone, that the Batman actually answers at the other end of it, right? And it's not disconnected. You go like, well, I'm not going to rely on him anymore. So those are the kind of relationships, but that's a big thing. That's a high profile thing, and that can't be the only way to build trust because, again, the hope is it doesn't happen very often. But then it's in lots of small things. It's in demonstrations of continual confidence, and it's in demonstration of continual attention over time, right? So I'm always, again, a great proponent of making sure that there's always a proactive conversation that goes on between a vendor and a customer, right? So one of the things that you have to make sure whenever you're, to go back maybe a couple different questions, you know, whenever you're selecting a vendor as a security as a service, is to identify whether or not it's actually a service or whether or not it's a product that's masquerading itself as a service, right? Because
you talked a lot about that before, and let's shine some more light on that.
Yeah, so one of the things, there's a certain amount of automation, there's a certain amount of systems, a certain amount of engines that all has to go into all this for it to scale or even to be truly functional on any real level. But in the end, whenever you're talking about expertise and you're talking about security as a service, there's a person on the other end of it. There's somebody that you can talk to. There's somebody who's going to proactively go and do work. Even though you haven't asked them to, they're just going to turn around and say, hey, I was taking a look through your data and I found this. That's a bit weird. What do you think? Right. That's the thing that you're paying for, because it gives you the demonstration that there's somebody constantly being vigilant. And it's not just that a computer is sort of throwing, you know, algorithms over the top of data. It's like there's an actual person there to interpret and make something that's going on there intelligible. And again, to build a story and to build a narrative and understand what's going on within the context of your business. So you always have to make sure that you're not just buying something that is effectively a product that's just going to throw things over the wall at you. It's like, well, who's at the other end of that? If I start asking questions, do I get answers back? Right. And then if we take ourselves out of that as sort of instant experience perspective, how often was I proactive to reach out to just to see how I was, or to ask if I had any questions? Or when did they turn up and be like, we've just done this. You haven't asked us to. It's not part of the service, but we've just had a look through your thing and we find this. You know, how often does that occur? How many touch points do you have? How many times does somebody just call you or send you an email just to check that everything's all right? And those small sort of little sort of like micro demonstrations of value, right? That I think can also have a bigger component of giving trust, because it's knowing not just that, you know, you can pick up, you know, as I said, the bat phone and the Batman will come calling, but you know, there is somebody there in the background constantly watching, right? It is about that vigilance. It's so that whenever you're sitting there on a Saturday and you realize you haven't had any incidents for the last 2 weeks, and that makes you feel good and not bad, that makes you feel, okay, we're doing well, we haven't had any incidents. I know they're watching. I know that they're looking for things and I haven't had any incidents, and that is a good thing, rather than to sit there and think I have an incident in 2 weeks. I wonder if they've forgotten about us, right? If you find yourself in that scenario, then that's not good, right? And that's a relationship that does not have that trust, because there hasn't been this consistent demonstration of, yes, we are here, yes, you haven't been breached, but we are still here and we are still looking. So there are those two real ways to go and do it, and in the end, it's about how proactive the vendor is in reaching out and making sure that you do feel that, you know, there is always somebody there, and then also making sure that in your hour of need that they can, you know, really satisfy what it is that they've, you know, written on the tin that you've bought.
Yeah. So Ben and I talked about this last week, the benefits of scale. So, you know, you talked about how we're constantly looking for things in our customer's environment that's outside of our service description. But, you know, keep in mind also that a cybersecurity as a service provider is helping various industries, right? So it doesn't matter if you're a pharmaceutical company, it doesn't matter if you're a credit union, a bank, a college, a university, PR agency, you name it. You know, we're watching across the entire board, right? So if there's a subset or a certain industry that's being particularly targeted one type of way, and we have other clients in that industry, well, you can bet that we're going to notify those clients ahead of the curve, right? Get them in a position that they can protect themselves before they potentially be exposed to that threat within their industry. Because a lot of these criminals do think in terms of verticals, right? So they're going to go where a lot of times where the money is, or where the easiest target is, or where the most sensitive information is, right? So having a cybersecurity as a service provider that's able to cover a vast number of industries, that sees trends in different industries and is able to share that across the whole customer base, that is a huge value add in itself, because there might be some attacks that are working in a particular industry, that we could pick up on and say, wow, yes, this industry is being targeted, but this industry over here could potentially also be targeted. We might want to let them know about that well in advance. So it's stuff like that as well, right?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the big things you get out of security as a service is ultimately that scale. I talked about, this idea where if you have a breach and then all of a sudden people can flood in and help, right? That's a really important component of scale. But the reason that security as a service scales at all is to do with sort of the factors you're talking about. So if I had, say for example, I had 10 businesses and they all decided they wanted cybersecurity, and they're all going to hire one individual to go and do their cybersecurity. Okay, great, you can go and do that. But in the end, what you'll find is that there's a significant portion of the work of those 10 people is just duplicated. We're just like, as a human race, we're just duplicating the same thing over and over again. So from that perspective, there's an attacker. Okay, well, the first one found that attacker, and then the second one found that third one. They all went and did certain things in order to try to identify what that attacker went and did, but it was all the same thing. Or there's a new piece of automation that they've done in order to try to, okay, well, let's weed out some of that noise and get something else. Well, now 10 people have all done exactly the same work. Well, then actually, if you think about it, if those 10 businesses who all had one individual person, if you just pull that all together, give all the data into one big data lake, then maybe you don't need 10 anymore. Maybe you only need, maybe 1, 2, 3. I mean, it kind of depends, right? And then, so from that perspective, it becomes much more effective. It's actually not only is it much more efficient, it's much more efficient use of just people, just in general. It's much more effective use of people. And then, so that's the kind of scale that you get, is that a piece of information that's learned about customer 1 can then be applied to customer 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, because it's the same piece of information. You don't need 10 people to discover the same piece of information 10 times. You just have one person who discovers it and then passes out the value to that to everyone. And the challenge, like as we've kind of talked about, the challenge is that not to veer too far into the, okay, we're just going to have one guy and they're just going to write a load of scripts and then that'll be it, right? Because now you're in the scenario where is it a product masquerading as a service, right? Because in the end, I've got my automation, and then people subscribe to my automation. My automation will fire things at them. Like, well, it's not a service anymore. Like, so from that perspective, then you have to maintain that personal relationship and make sure that even if you're building that automation that can apply to 10 different customers, that you don't lose the context of the individual customer, because there are going to be individual aspects of that you cannot get rid of, right? There are individual aspects of that about why this attack is important to some, why this attack is not important to others, why one customer is really, really concerned about their availability. Well, another customer isn't really concerned about their availability, right? Well, then you have to make sure that you're making sure that that context is being obeyed in all the different work that you're doing, and making sure that you're able to, again, not just throw things over the wall. You have to put it in a narrative and then understand, okay, well, this is the story of what is going on inside your environment, so that you can understand, well, what is it that I would go and do, rather than just throwing just individual pieces of data. So
and all of this, mind you, happens so fast. So new exploits pop up into the wild every single day. For one person to stay on top of all that stuff, even 3 people, very, very difficult. And, we respect anyone that tries to do that themselves. But if you're scratching your head, if you're hitting your head against the wall and you need some extra help, there are organizations out there that you can lean on. So moving into our, let's open it up for questions. So Jonny, I just want to thank you. We did do an introduction, but for those of you that haven't been on a webinar with Jonny, Jonny is our Director of Security Operations and a Director of Security Research and our Security Operations Center. So, you have firsthand insight into an individual who is vigilant on behalf of the Cygilant customer base, right? So there's a lot of options out there for you folks, and we encourage you all to do your due diligence, to get out there, do some research. If you do find yourself in need of some extra help, don't hesitate to reach out. We don't bite, and that we have individuals like Jonny who are so passionate about cybersecurity and willing to help walk you along that journey. So without going on too much of a diatribe, let's open it up for questions, and then we'll wrap it up. We'll let everyone get their 15-minute lunch break in. But Jonny, that was an awesome conversation. Thank you so much.
Yeah, anytime. Yeah, I mean, the only thing that I hope, the only thing I hope is that I can give people some sort of insight into, into a SOC and the questions they should ask and whatever else. I consider that to be generally a public good. Like the people that are better informed about the security industry in general are able to make better decisions, are able to go into any security relationship, right? With a better understanding as to, where do I stand and what kind of questions I need to ask, and like what expectations should I have? So even if for the people that are listening to this, even if Cygilant isn't for them, I hope as a very least they sort of learned something or got some sort of insight into how security as a service kind of works, and hopefully that stays with them even then.
Yeah, and remember, guys, in closing, we'll leave you with this: you don't have to walk that cybersecurity journey alone. All right. So until next time, we'll catch you guys later. Enjoy your days.